And you mentioned this in your book, comparing your visit to the Soviet Union to when you came to the States. Having grown up in Europe and gone to British schools and traveled quite a bit myself, when you talk, for instance, to left-wing environmental activists who act as if the environment would have been better off under a socialist or even communist regime rather than our capitalist system, obviously these people never understood the amount of unrestricted pollution by the corrupt governmental organizations that typified the whole East Bloc and turned it into one vast dead zone of filthy water, filthy air, people with shortening lifespans because of the thing. So I just want to turn both what you have in your book, but just your opinion. Speaking for myself now, I think there's a lot wrong with capitalism in the sense that you talk about in your book, which is this sort of growing divide between the have and the have-nots, the billionaire class and everybody else. Can you talk a little bit about how you frame this in your book, American Breakdown, but also go beyond that just to your point of view as someone who's observed our world well? How do you think this shakes out? Obviously, no one who's familiar with the actual history of communism or how socialism worked out in big chunks of the world thinks that that's a better model. On the other hand, the environmental concerns are real, and so is the divide between the wealthy, the super wealthy, and everyone else, and the tech bros and all the rest of this. As a snapshot of just you right now today, Jerry, where's your head at on this? Because I don't have an answer to this. I'm asking you what you think.
Well, I'm sorry to have to say I'm with you. I have to acknowledge a lot of humility. I have a lot of reasons to be humble, and this is one of them. I think I can identify the problem. I don't know how it shakes out. I have some ideas, and I'll share them. Look, I think this problem of inequality is I mean, I talked again, the framing of the book is trust. It's about why trust has collapsed. And we've talked about many of the reasons I cite in the book as why trust has collapsed, in particular, the capture of these institutions by this sort of progressive elite, which I think has undermined faith in those institutions. But another very important thing I talk about in the book, and another reason for the decline in trust in these institutions and in America to some extent as an idea, and this is a really worrying thing, is this problem of inequality. America, again, let's be clear, inequality is an inevitable outcrop of a free market, right? That it's just going to happen. There are some people who are more talented, work harder, get luckier than others. That's the way capitalism works. It's a brilliant thing. It rewards talent, it rewards hard work, and sometimes, it rewards luck. But it's necessary to do that. And we know from now 250 years of economic history, and we have the perfect, it's very rare in history or kind of in sociology that you get an experiment, you get a real life experiment. We've had an experiment of capitalism, which largely is what the United States and Britain and other, some extent Western Europe has followed for much of the last certainly 50, 100 years. And we had the experiment of socialism, which is what the Soviet Union practiced. And to some extent, we can talk about China's a bit different, but we're seeing more of socialism in China now. And the outcomes were dramatically different. And again, you mentioned this, I say this in the introduction to my book. It was the first time it was really brought home to me when I visited the Soviet Union and the United States for the first time in the same year in the 1980s. And it just suddenly struck me in a way that 100 books didn't quite have that same effect. Right. I could see with my own eyes just what an absolute disaster socialism was. And I came to New York and America, and for all its chaos and mess and all of the kind of stuff, what an incredible dynamism, energy, and opportunity that the capitalism represented. So that, again, let's stipulate that capitalism works and is better, but there are limits, and I think we are exploring the limits of capitalist excess, if you like. And by the way, part of what I would argue is this actually isn't what part of the problem we have, and I talk about this a bit in the book, is why there's so much inequality has arisen is not because of too much free market capitalism, but because of not enough. I mean, I'm very much a believer in the idea that capitalism has been corrupted in the United States in the last 20 or 30 years by people call it crony capitalism, if you like, very powerful companies that have got bigger and bigger and bigger and been allowed to get bigger and bigger and bigger by government regulation, by the market. And one of the things I talk about in the book is the collapse of what economists call industrial concentration. That is the shrinking of the number of companies in each sector of the economy to just 4 or 5. And that when you have that, you don't have much competition. What you have is extraordinarily generous returns to the capitalists, to the owners, and to the managers who run the capital for them, and not much return to the workers. And that's exactly what we've seen. So we've got incredibly powerful companies that have been allowed to become powerful. The American political system allows them to do that by allowing them to buy extraordinary influence in Washington and state capitals and get regulations and get legislation that suits them. So we don't have a real genuine. Part of my argument in the book is that we need to return to a genuine dynamic free market capitalism where you have real competition and not this this crony capitalism that we have right now. So
yeah, Google and 3 other people kind of thing.
yeah, well, it's true in every sector. Airlines, there's like 4 airlines that dominate the airline sector. Telecommunications, there are like 3 companies.
Well, and you talk about how these people all start out with this great ideal, and then what actually turns out to be. I mean, within our system,
And I just want to say, Frank, the reason this is so important, and again, measured in polling terms, as we all know now, for the last 20 years or so, you ask Americans, do they think their children will have a better standard of living than they will? The answer by a large majority is no. That's never been the case in America before. That is inimical and totally contrary to the idea of the American dream. That that progress is something that we can expect. Again, you work hard, you're talented, you get all the breaks, you achieve, and you can succeed, and you do better than your parents. Most Americans don't believe that's working anymore. And that's the problem with the system. That means the system isn't working. And the rich here in this country, the advantage, but frankly, people like me and probably people like you, I can't speak for you, but I can speak for me. I've been very successful. I've done very well. I've got many, many people to thank for that. But they're kind of able to buy influence. This is again what is so problematic for America. People like to think of America as a classless society where anybody can get on. That's true to some extent, but increasingly, you look at these universities, the admissions into these elite universities, the vast majority are people who went there themselves. They got legacies, or they've basically been able to buy a good education for their children to get them into those universities. Every time I go to major event, I do. One of the things I do in my job is I go to corporate events around the world. I speak to CEOs. You go to dinner with a bunch of CEOs, and they're all congratulating themselves because their daughters have just been admitted to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Stanford. And that's great. Well done. Congratulations. But that's perpetuating this inequality and exacerbating this inequality. That's got to change. I think that has got to change. A country cannot survive with the levels of inequality and expansion of inequality that we're seeing here. We've got to do something about that. And again, I've got some answers, which I just mentioned there. Tackle the growth of industry, bring more competition, genuine competition into all of these sectors. Really give the opportunities to people who don't have the opportunities right now. Improve the education for those. There are some solutions like that. They're not very convincing solutions, but I know the problem, and we've got to the best people in this country have got to exercise their minds to address that problem. Otherwise, this country will not survive.
Yeah.